I think what I'm quietly underneath these films suggesting that really we've lived through an age of individualism that came out of the Second World War and the horrors of those of collectivism, like fascism, like communist totalitarianism. It has been a glorious and wonderful and liberating time. It's been a time in history unlike anything else. It has all its problems and it had lots of other things that were wrong with it, but it was a moment of great liberation. But it is very strange that what started off as an idea of empowerment has now led in America and throughout the West and in China and Russia to a sense of millions and millions of individuals feeling anxious and uncertain and frightened about the future. And those in power having nothing to offer to explain to them how to get out of that. You get a sense that something might be at the end of its natural life.
This film will tell the story of how we got to this strange place. It is about how over the past 40 years, politicians, financiers and technological utopians, rather than face up to the real complexities of the world, retreated. Instead, they constructed a simpler version of the world in order to hang on to power.
Matt, you brought up the San Francisco crime wave. Did you see that that blue check Caitlin Flanagan, who is like totally convinced that, quote, California has collapsed?
It's collapsed.
People are like, actually, like the the value of my house has doubled over the last 2 years. How is this possible? And she's like, I don't know. The state has collapsed.
The thing that I'm like seeing with my eyes has conflicted with the thing that I have believe because of like lead paint based entertainment that I've been consuming. Which one could be wrong? I can't square it. She also said in another tweet that she said that crime is not just going up, it's not just ticking up, but that it is at or exceeded early 90s crime levels.
Absolutely.
Which is when like crime was at the highest it's ever been.
Which is the highest it's ever been.
Yeah.
It's just like convincing yourself of this model of the world that is completely synthetic and then insisting that you are actually the one most connected to regular people. When the fucking pandemic began and when we really got like into it a few months and then we all start realizing, this is not going to get fixed. Like this is going to be a huge like permanent emergency that's going to lead to crime going up.
Yeah,
of course it is. Denying it's happening, or that it's not a big deal, is absurd because it's not like you have to point to like, oh, it's because of BLM or it's because of defund. You don't have to defend against that accusation.
But then now there's the extra element that they are experiencing what we did to Russia in the 90s. Whoops, we sold everything. Whoops. Yeah. Whoops, we fucking strip mined everything. And if you treat people like they are colonialized subjects in the Middle East, and then you also tell them through your actions that there is no future, that this will never get better because there are no institutions, how do you think people will act?
You can acknowledge that, yeah, we've just had a giant mass sacrifice as a society and told everybody that none of our institutions have any legitimacy or ability to do anything, and you're on your own.
Happy New Year, everyone.
Even those who thought they were attacking the system, the radicals, the artists, the musicians, and our whole counterculture, actually became part of the trickery. Because they too had retreated into the make-believe world, which is why their opposition has no effect, and nothing ever changes.
I think what he discovered was that culture had become this arena in which you could act out being radical. And you all felt very radical, and then really nothing ever changed, which is sort of true. I mean, it's one of the great mysteries of our time, is the way the left retreated into radical culture, in inverted commas, at a time when actually inequalities, the structure of power became much more rigid, much worse, and has done very little to change it. It's sort of, it's always baffled me, this one. It doesn't mean that culture isn't very good and it doesn't express its time beautifully, but it may be actually expressing its time beautifully in its very inability to change the world. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Rather than its rhetoric.
It's like, it's a feature of our culture, which is now really synonymous with politics, because it just seems like politics as a thing that can intervene in the lives of people or provide like a motivation to organize large numbers of people, like the mass politics that Adam Curtis talks about in his documentaries, is gone now as a model for like what politics is. And it just seems like, and we've talked about this before, that it just like what's being replaced with is culture as politics. And like that's the terrain in which people can compete with one another to sort of like have some sort of metric by which to judge like who's in charge or who's winning and losing in our politics, culture, whatever.
People like to point that out about Avatar. Oh, it had no cultural, long-lasting impact. Well, what is the actual cultural, long-lasting impact of other big movies like The Revengers? It's memes. It's easily digested little pellets of like things that replace your personality. The stuff in Avatar that's memorable, it's not like, it's not guys in suits who do quips and do bants that you can repeat to your friends, because Jake Sully is, as we'll talk about, sort of an intentional empty space in the middle of the movie. What the stuff that like is resonant, it can't be translated culturally. And so it just has to go away. Everyone saw it, and everybody fucking loved it when they were watching it, and they're lying if they say they didn't, because it didn't make that much movie. It didn't make that much money. A total new, not a licensed IP thing. Nobody saw. Everybody didn't see that movie and was like, that sucked. It's just that over time, as they thought about it, and nothing could stick because there was nothing in the culture to like pick it up and turn it into anything.
It did have an amazing effect on people. But the media consciously did not want it to be memeified. And it could be memeified because it's too,
you couldn't process.
But what it really does is mean that like we don't have a culture anymore. We don't have this is the death of culture. And I really
it's the closest thing to church is going and experiencing these fucking mega cultural moments that affirm a value that you now represent by having witnessed it.
But this retreat into a dream world allowed dark and destructive forces to fester and grow outside. Forces that are now returning to pierce the fragile surface of our carefully constructed fake world.
I just have this theory that we may look back at culture as the way in which this system managed radicalism. It created this lovely little nursery in which everyone could go and be radical. And this goes back to the question I asked at the end of the last time we talked, which is, do you really want change? Is that if you really want to have a revolution in your country or in my country, then you would have to accept that maybe you'd lose power. And not only would you lose power, you might actually lose your income. You might have to lose your status. You might have to lose a lot of the things that make your life so happy.
You might lose your life.
You might lose your life, like people have done in the past when they have fought to change the world. But they did it because they believed they were part of something bigger than themselves and wanted this to go on beyond their own existence. In the age of the individual, no one thinks like that any longer.
We were talking about culture war earlier, and culture war is interesting from a political or like political media especially perspective, because it's one of those wars where no side wants to win.
Yeah. No, God, no.
Winning isn't the point. Fighting is the point.
Right, fighting's the point. You sell more of everything by fighting it. You don't
it's
want
the dynamo. It moves the thing.
Right. You don't actually want things like Dr. Seuss being canceled or whatever to stop happening. You want that to keep happening because that keeps the whole thing going.
Yes.
It's why our modern wars never end. It's the same basic reasoning.
They marched through London against the Iraq War saying, not in my name. No one thought about that in revolutions. To go back to the corrosive effect of individualism. It eats away at that collective power that can give people the possibility of changing the world. But on the other hand, though, we don't want to be in a collective. We want to be free individuals. It's wonderful. It's lovely. But it limits us. And as you said earlier on, when things go bad, you feel alone and very weak.
Well, speaking of unorganized anxiety, I mean, like the Rogan kerfuffle this week did sort of resuscitate, and I'm sorry to do this to bring it back to like Chapo circa 2020, but it led to like a renewal of the old debate over like, can we say now that Bernie going on Rogan was a bad look, or like Bernie platforming Rogan, or like any of this bullshit? And I'm sorry to indulge in this again, but it's like, did you learn anything over the last 2 years?
No,
Did you learn
because if
anything
you
at all?
actually absorbed the lessons of the last 2 years, it's too terrifying to contemplate, which is that all this stuff that us included spent so much time fixating on ended up being totally extraneous to the process and irrelevant. And it's that confrontation of irrelevancy that is just too horrifying to contemplate. People would much rather continue, just go basically memento themselves back to 2017 and have the same arguments over and over again and agonize over the same position from the same imagined position of like influence within the political system, than accept a premise that the implications of which fundamentally undermine their entire approach to politics and culture and everything else, because there's nothing to replace it.
This overreaction to Rogan, I think, is a mistake. My point is, we all exist in this world and on this planet, and there's no question that there is egregious misinformation that's purposeful and hateful and all those other things. And that being moderated is a credit to the platforms that run them. Joe Rogan has power because so many people listen to him. But that
because of the elk meat.
Let me go back, because you're right, Jay. Jay Rogan has power because of elk meat. He has 4-hour conversations, and they are expansive. And he may say some things that you think is misinformation, and he may platform people that you think are wrong. But to single that out as something so egregious as to have to be, I just don't. I think there are dishonest, bad actors in the world, and identifying those is so much more important to me.
But the one area where you do want to win a culture war is if you're Disney.
Mm-hmm. Because there's money at stake.
Yeah, because it's like, oh yeah, that's total dominance of the marketplace. It's different for us. We can own the entire marketplace. No one can own the entire marketplace in politics in America.
By definition, then it's not politics anymore.
Right. But in media, you can. Disney practically does.
Thanks to politics.
If there's any real victor of the culture war in the past 20 years, it's these fucking assholes.
Oh, absolutely. The consolidators, the monopolizers everywhere winning while everyone else just keeps fighting.
And I also think sometimes those grand gestures of I'm removing myself doesn't necessarily take into account, like you're on Comcast, right? Comcast or Time Warner. So if you're on any cable station, right, they've got Fox News on. You telling me Fox News isn't a willful purveyor of misinformation, dishonest to its core? So now everybody on TV has to pull out of their fucking shows or deplatform, because in the same tube that you exist, they exist. I've been in his position on a much smaller scale, where people suddenly look to you as, by you doing it, by you platforming someone. That's the big word they use. You're platforming someone, and you don't push back hard enough, or you don't do it to the manner that they would do it. Once you go down that road of, if you have a lot of listeners and you say something that's either incorrect or possibly harmful, we are in competition for ideas and minds. And unless you can come up with, it's sort of like, we used to talk about this with the war on terror, right? I always thought one of the biggest reasons why the war on terror was such a fucked idea was the general strategy of it was 19 people who were extremists took action and bombed the World Trade Center and did this terrible thing and killed 3,000 people. And so we were going to go bomb the shit out of that country until 19 people wouldn't want to do that anymore.
No.
Meanwhile, it was hatched in like a basement in Hamburg, and it was the world is interconnected through ideas. Like, unless you have a bomb that can kill ideas, you're just chasing, it's a doomed strategy. Like, make better arguments. I'm not saying that it'll work, but you can't cloister yourself to what's out there. You have to know.
When you are one of the people with a platform speaking and you travel in the waters of empathy, wanting to do better, wanting to do the right thing, and you mess up, people react way differently than if Joe Rogan traveling in the waters of like, maybe vaccines are bad for you, don't take them. Like, he could mess up and will never face consequences in the way that if you're known for trying to do the right thing, you will face intense consequences. Like, the scale is off.
Chelsea, if I go on Twitter, I don't have to go on there more than 30 seconds before I can find somebody letting me know what they will never forgive me for. One of the biggest questions I always used to get asked was,
I don't understand that.
Why do you have O'Reilly on your show? And I go, well, I have people in my family that are to the right of him, and I still talk to them. So why not talk to him? And I feel like you have to engage. Like, how do you not engage with people? Like, the whole point of engagement is hopefully clarification. Now, you may not get it. It may be a fool's errand, but I will never give up on engagement.
What I also know is that you can't put individualism back in the box. And what we're waiting for is something or someone or some idea, some vision of the future, which says, no, I can square the circle. I can actually create a system which will allow you to carry on thinking and feeling genuinely that you are a confident individual, yet also relish and like being part, the feeling of being part of something that can build something in the future, which will go on past your own existence. Because that's quite thrilling and quite exciting. We're waiting for that. Part of me thinks in a practical way, the first thing to do is literally take the internet back from the people who got hold of it, the venture capitalists, in about 2000 with the dot-com crash, and they've skewed it and narrowed it and distorted it and screwed up journalism in the process. Take it back and actually use it as a way of genuinely connecting people collectively, which was its original utopian ideas, and I've always believed in those sort of things. That was the good ideas in the 90s. That's one practical thing.
Yeah.
I'm more worried about the algorithm of misinformation than the purveyor of misinformation. Misinformation will always be out there, but if the algorithm drives people further and further down the rabbit hole, the fucking algorithm is the amplifier and the catalyst of extremism. And if you can, I would much rather fuck with the algorithm than deplatform and all these other things. They're all making this idea of like, we've got to remove this from Spotify. And you're like, no, you've got to engage on Spotify, and you've got to figure out a way to neuter the algorithms.
I just say we have to. Like, I mean, if you care about this going well, I wake up every day and I ask, what will it take for this whole thing to go well? Like, and how do we just orient each of our choices as much as possible towards this going well? I mean, we have a whole bunch of problems. I do look a lot at the environmental issues, the permafrost, methane bombs, like the timelines that we have to deal with certain problems are crunching in. We also have certain dangerous exponential technologies that are emerging, decentralization of, CRISPR, and like there's a lot of existential threat. It's hard, but I think we each have a responsibility when you see this stuff to say, what will it take for this to go well?
We have decreasing ability to make shared sense of the world. And in any kind of democratic society, if you can't make shared sense of the world, you can't act effectively on issues. But the types of tech that are decreasing our ability to make shared sense of the world are also increasing the speed at which tech is changing the world and the total consequentiality of it.
I'll say also these issues get more and more weird over time. My co-founder Asa Raskin will say that it's making reality more and more virtual over time, because we haven't talked about how as technology advances, at hacking our weaknesses, we start to prefer it over the real thing.
Quote, California has collapsed.
It's collapsed.
The value of my house has doubled over the last 2 years. How is this possible? And she's like, I don't know. State has collapsed.
The thing that I'm like seeing with my eyes has conflicted with the thing that I have believe because of like lead paint based entertainment that I've been consuming.
Like again, like yeah, like like if your view of the reality is entirely mediated by the TV, like you could easily believe. I remember fucking Meghan McCain talking about how like all of Fifth Avenue was like a blasted ruin. Like it was like Dresden after World War II when like the Black Lives Matter protests happened, and I was like, fucking I live in New York City. Like I can I was just like outside this morning. Like it's fine. It's fucking totally. There was a police precinct on my fucking corner.
Twitter is not for nuance, and Twitter is not for context. Both of those things can't exist there. If you tweet with nuance and context, you will barely exist there. It's not.
The aggregators are there to distill things to their greatest potential energy, and their greatest potential energy is what's the most inflammatory.
Yeah.
Do you get my point? Like
I think of it like we're trapped in a body and that's eating itself. So like it's kind of a cannibalism economy because our economic growth right now with these tech companies is based on eating our own organs. So we're eating our own mental health organs. We're eating the health of our children. We're eating sorry for being so gnarly about it, but it's a cannibalistic system. In a system that's hurting itself or eating itself or punching itself, if one of the neurons wakes up in the body, it's not enough to change that. It's going to keep punching itself. But if enough of the neurons wake up and say, this is stupid, why would we build our system this way?
Take the internet back from the people who got hold of it, the venture capitalists, in about 2000 with the dot-com crash, and they've skewed it and narrowed it and distorted it and screwed up journalism in the process. Take it back and actually use it as a way of genuinely connecting people collectively.
Now recognize that we're living in this sort of cannibalist system in which the economic incentive is to debase the life support systems of your democracy. We can all wake up and say, that's stupid. Let's do something differently. Let's actually change the system. Let's use different platforms. Let's fund different platforms. Let's regulate and tame the existing Frankensteins. And I don't mean regulating speech. I mean really thoughtfully, how do we change the incentives so it doesn't go to the same race to the bottom? And we have to all recognize that we're now 10 years into this hypnosis experiment of warping of the mind. So I think if you were to imagine a different system, we would ask, who are the thinkers that are most open-minded and synthesis-oriented, where they can actually steelman the other side? Actually, they can do, for this speech, here is the opposite counter-argument. They can show that they understand that. And imagine those people get lifted up. But the people who generally do that aren't the ones who get the tens of millions of followers on these surfaces. Right. It's the black and white, extreme, outrage-oriented thinkers and speakers that get rewarded in this attention economy.
The other is just a story about the world. It doesn't have to be very complicated, but it just have to have this sense that I quote this guy called David Graeber, who is an activist, both at the front of the series and the end of the series, who simply said the great hidden truth about the world is that we made this world, and if we made it, then we can make it differently. And I find that really thrilling. I love that idea because we've been persuaded that we can't. Complexity theory, psychology, all those things now tell us we're weak, uncertain, and you can't do anything. But the truth is, which is really what I'm trying to demonstrate in these films, is we did make this world together. We all did. And, it's our responsibility for having been individuals that corroded the power of the politicians. It's the politicians' fault for having given up on the idea that you actually can challenge those in power. We did this together. And if we did that together, we can make it different together. And I think that's really quite thrilling. But the way to do that is someone's got to come along and say, yes, you can still be an individual, but you can actually work together to create something beyond this. And I think that will happen. If it doesn't, then the horrible nationalisms and the old myths of the past are going to come back. But you don't do it by telling people they're stupid. You have to go and talk to those people who voted for Donald Trump and voted for Brexit, even if they're racist.
You have O'Reilly on your show, and I go, well, I have people in my family that are to the right of him, and I still talk to them, so why not talk to him? And I feel like you have to engage. Like, how do you not engage with people? Like, the whole point of engagement is hopefully clarification. Now, you may not get it. It may be a fool's errand, but I will never give up on engagement.
They're not racist because they're just... Racism doesn't come out of nowhere. It comes because they're frightened and scared and angry. You've got to go and talk to those people. And you've got to do it. And the only person I ever saw do it was Bernie Sanders. He went and talked to people after Donald Trump was elected, and I thought that was quite right. Really good. If you can't change the world just by talking to each other and producing radical culture.